I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today, General, and I'd like to learn a little bit about your life and your early life. And going back to your early years, what induced you to go to West Point?
Well, my father went to West Point, and my uncle went to West Point. So, and my grandfather was a captain in the Forest Cavalry. So the cavalry in West Point ran very deep in my traditions. My brother also went to West Point, and my second brother went to Annapolis. The only reason he went there was he couldn't pass the military physical. So all of us, all three boys in the family, were aimed that way.
Well, that sounds like a pretty good reason. You became commander of the 3rd Cavalry Group after Colonel WWII was captured in September of 1945. What was your previous assignment?
Well, I came into Normandy as executive officer of the 106th Armored Cavalry. That is Illinois National Guard, commanded by Bernard Wilson, who was a wonderful commander. So I learned a lot from him. And then Joe Fickett, who commanded the 6th Cavalry, broke his leg, and so General Patton promoted me to the 6th Cavalry. And I was very fortunate. The 6th Cavalry had one squadron guarding the 3rd Army CP, which is a very simple job. The other one, he had one of these information nests because the signal car broke down. So I had a frontline seat at the war for the month of August, visiting every division and seeing that my detachment there was banging in, because the 6th Cavalry had never been cadres, and they could do high-speed CW, bug nets even, over long distances. So they were much better than the signal corps. And so we had this net that was reporting on all the divisions, and I could visit them around, so I got to know all the division commanders. Some of them didn't like the job because they thought we were ratting on them. You know, they couldn't get away with anything. So that was very interesting, and then when Colonel WWII, Joe Fickett got well, came back to his old regiment, and then WWII got captured just about the same time, so I went up to the 3rd Cavalry.
Tell us about your tenure with the 3rd Cavalry in Europe during the war.
Well, let's see it. As I recall, around the 10th of September that I took command, maybe a little bit later, I'm not sure. I can't remember that. But anyway, I stayed with them all the way to the end, and then we were given a zone of occupation, kind of an infamous Feldafing Jewish DP camp amongst them. Big German hospital, so we were pretty busy actually. The war was over. I left in early November, gathered enough points, and I was sick of that job by then. So I left. I made it back to El Paso on November the 7th. This is my wedding anniversary.
Will you tell us about your career after World War II, such as Korea and
yes.
What happened beyond that?
Well, right afterward, I went back to Fort Riley, took something called the Command General School. I.D. White, who had been a division commander, was the CO there, and we ran a good tight post. He straightened the Army up. From there, I went to the Army Corps Staff College for a brief course, and then went over to Japan, and was a deputy for intelligence of the G2 section. I was not in the counterintelligence or the spying business. I was in the evaluation part of it, and worked for General Willoughby there on MacArthur's staff for 3 years. And he was a rascal. He threw 3 books at me one time when I told him it was dead wrong. But he had a lot of respect for me because I'd commanded the regiment for a long time. And so then the Korean War broke out, and I asked to go with the 10 Corps, Selma, and the chief said no. And then in February, Bill Quinn, who was the G2 10 Corps, got a regiment, and they pulled me over, and I was jumping at Amos G2 10 Corps. And I'm very proud of the fact that we called the February Chinese attack, and General Amos didn't believe it. And we took a pretty bad beating, the 10 Corps did. So then I called the May attack, and they really got ready for it. And that's the first time that the Chinese really got the hell beat out of them. we were ready for him, and I'm very proud of that, as a matter of fact. Well, then General Van Fleet pulled me down to be his G2 at 8th Army, then to the War College, and up to the Army War College, then to the 3rd Armored Division, and then I started doing all these things in Europe. Assistant Division Commander, opposite Fontainebleau and Lancet, commanding 4th Armored Division, commanding Berlin, commanding 5th Corps, commanding U.S. Army Europe.
You were commander of all the U.S. forces in Europe then?
No, all the Army forces.
Army forces.
No, there was an Air Force commander and a Navy commander.
As the European commander, you must have met a lot of world leaders and heads of state. Would you like to tell us about any of that?
Well, I knew the German government quite well. Of course, I knew Willy Brandt to begin with. That was sort of my political education was up there in Berlin. We got to be very good friends. I admired him. But he had a few quirks in his character. They called him Whiskey Willie. And he used to have a broadcast every Tuesday evening. And most of the time he was obviously drunk on the television. So he hit the bottle pretty hard. Had a very charming wife who later divorced him, unfortunately. I knew Adenauer, and one time I sat down next to Adenauer, and he went into a discourse about how the German educational system wasn't as good as the French because they all quit 2 o'clock so their mothers could feed them a big family. And the French went 2 hours more, but he said, the French are overeducated. Too much education. He says anybody who sells tickets has been to the Sorbonne. He said, sore as hell, and they're selling tickets at the railroad station. He said, we don't do that. I knew all the ambassadors, our American ambassadors, because every year we'd have a war game down at Berchtesgaden. And all the ambassadors from behind the curtain and from free Europe got down there with a bunch of generals. And for instance, we had one war game where Yugoslavia was overrun by the Russians, and you know, what did we do? So I got to know all them. Aside from that, I got to know all the senior generals too. Hackett, who wrote that splendid book, World War III, I believe it is, was my counterpart. He commanded the Northern Army Group when I commanded the Central Army Group. And I've often regretted that I didn't do the same thing because he just took one of our regular war games and made it into a book, and he made $1 million from it. A good book. Anyway, I knew a lot of them. I've lost contact with almost all of them, though. A couple, de Maizière, Brandt, we still exchange Christmas cards, but not much more.
I understand you were a champion horseman during your early years in the cavalry.
Well, I joined the 8th Cavalry, Fort Bliss, Texas, when I graduated in 1933. And it soon became obvious to me that if you weren't a good horseman, you wouldn't amount to a damn in the cavalry, you know. Just you had to. And I had a good build for it. I weighed about 145 pounds and tall and thin and good legs, and so I really worked at it. And it was a lot of fun. Maybe work is the wrong word, but we were drilled. We go to drill in the morning, and then the soldiers were all up on detail, so some of the senior people would teach us horsemanship. And for instance, Bill Bradford was squadron commander, Harry Chamberlain, those guys were all Olympic champions, so they coached us. We played polo and so on, and that carried it on to Meyer when I went there after the cavalry school. I won a lot of silver at the cavalry school at the various horse shows on a beautiful mare called Ethel D. It was a very brave mare. She wasn't afraid of anything, and she'd jump anything. And unfortunately, she was killed during the war. They sent her to Fort Robinson, and she was struck by lightning. I was just like I lost my brother almost.
Or your sister.
My sister, my mare. So then I went on to Meyer, and you had reference to Rita Hayworth. I won the military championship at Madison Square Garden in New York, and Rita Hayworth came out to present the silver platter to me. And my wife was at the audience, and she was very jealous. Rita Hayworth gave me this.
She was sitting with the Secretary of Defense, wasn't she, at that time?
Yeah. I don't know where you got that from.
Well, I'll show you a little later.
Okay.
We've talked about General Polk, the soldier. Tell us about Jim Polk, the family man.
Well, I mentioned that my first station was at Fort Bliss, and after I'd been there about almost 3 years, I met Josephine Level. She'd been away at school, so she hadn't been there earlier. And so I started courting her pretty hard. And she turned out to be a really wonderful. We were married in November of 36, and went up to Fort Riley that year, to the Cavalry School. She didn't know anything about the military, but she learned very quickly. And she was just a wonderful hostess at all the places we were. She enjoyed being a hostess. She loved people. And so that, well, when we got to Berlin, we had a marvelous staff up there, and almost always we were entertaining senators and congressmen, all those people coming through. So she fell into that naturally. She was kind of the mother of all these outfits that I commanded, you know. Made sure the ladies wore hats and gloves at parties and knew their manners and all this kind of stuff. So she was a great woman. I had 2 children. She had 2 children. My daughter, again, Josephine, called her Jody, who is now quite a well-known photographer in the Southwest. She's happily married. She has 3 children. My son is happily married, has 2 daughters, and he's president of something called Property Trust of America, which is one of these real estate investment trusts. It's got a book value of about $60 million. Very successful. I'm very proud of it. I tried to get him to go to West Point. I took him up there twice. He said, "Dad, this is not for me." No, thank you. He did 2 years as an officer in ROTC, in the reserve. So I'm very fortunate. I have a very fine family. They're all behaving themselves and doing well.
Well, you've had a very interesting life, and one that you can certainly be proud of. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today. Thank you very much, General.
Thank you. Okay.